It's the On Stage podcast with Chris Ruppert. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the On Stage podcast tonight. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
It's my pleasure.
And learning that you actually not only repair instruments, but apparently you repaired instruments from some of the most famous musicians.
I have, and then it's that in itself has been a great experience, and especially for the bands that I grew up with. Imagine, meeting these heroes of yours, and working on their, if not their own instruments, their horn players' instruments. It's been a wonderful life, great career.
I started reading your first part of the book as well. I love the book. When you were a young man on the road, you would usually look in the local telephone directory under music to see what you might see. And then you found this. When you mentioned Yellow Pages, I'm like, I remember holding a Yellow Pages in my hand for it to call like pizza shops and order. And it's now, you don't even need them anymore, but I sure do miss them.
It was fun. Whenever you were in a different town, you could open up those Yellow Pages and, like you said, just open up for music stores and see what was in there. And if something struck your fancy, well, then you paid a visit to them and you talk shop.
So, Bill, could you give us a little bit of story about who Billy Cole is and exactly what made you become a instrument, I guess you call an instrument cleaner, or repairer, or fixer?
Sure. I think the formal would be a technician, woodwind or brass technician. I've always called myself a repairman because that's what I've done. For the last 45 years, I've repaired woodwind and brass instruments. I started at a very young age. I went to school at university at 17 years old to learn how to fix the instruments. It was a 2-year program. And after I graduated in 1977, can you believe it? I couldn't find a job, so I temporarily opened up my own shop till I could find employment. And 45 years later, the joke is, if you know of a job, let me know, because I never wanted to find one after I started. So again, it's been a great life, and it's always been a small family business. My wife involved with mostly the support part of it, and my children are involved in it in a small way. But my son, most of all, is my apprentice and working side by side with me for the last 10 years now.
So, what's your favorite instrument to repair?
I think the best way to answer that is the best instrument you could possibly get your hands on. Okay, so it wouldn't be necessarily a flute, because I love repairing flutes and saxophones and clarinets, but it's the best, the highest quality instruments are the most fun to work on, because you appreciate the way they're built, and you almost become a friend of the person who built the instrument, complimenting them, and that's got to be my best answer is whatever's best. Of course, the opposite is junk. If a junky instrument comes in, it's much harder to fix and bring up to the standards that I like and that my customer likes. So basically, a nice instrument, and I've worked on some very nice instruments over the years.
The intricately designed watches that the watchmakers work on, especially the pocket watches, how intricate they are. And they use the eyeglass and the tweezers, and they go right in there and they take these little components out. They clean everything. And I've seen them literally put the watches back together. Now, talking about instruments, what do you think is the most intricately designed instrument that's not only has a difficulty level for you, but the amount of time it took to not only take everything out, but put everything back in, still make it work properly?
I would say looking at all the standard instruments, I would say oboe is probably the most intricate. However, on occasions, I'll work on an instrument that is over and above the mechanism. And how best to describe this? I have a customer. His name is Carl Schwarzenegger. He's Arnold's cousin, and he lives nearby. Yeah, he lives nearby in Catskill, and he's always played in a polka band all his life. He brought his clarinets over from Austria. It's a full band system, so it has all these intricate levers and extra keys on it and everything. That is probably the more complicated instruments I've ever worked on, his two clarinets. And he first came to me because nobody wanted to work on them. So I would say, oh, sure, of course. And I've grown to be good friends with Carl, and he's got some great stories, some about Arnold, who seems to be a wonderful man, according to his stories, and his stories about being on the road as a polka band. And, so on occasion you come across these oddities, if you will. But pretty much all the instruments I work on, I'm pretty used to. I figured, thinking about all the repair tags I bought over the years, I probably bought about 60,000 repair tags. So, I've at least repaired 60,000 instruments, probably more at this point, because I don't tag everything. Some people walk into the shop and I'll just fix it on the spot and they'll go off to their gig. But a lot of instruments, these hands have been good to me.
So, Bill, that's amazing. I mean, Carl Schwarzenegger, oh my goodness, wow. Did you actually get a chance to meet Arnold himself, or did he bring up some stories?
No. I just enjoyed Carl's stories about Arnold. He has a great story about when Arnold first came to America. He would stay at Carl's house, and just those wonderful years starting out. And Arnold always had a great attitude. And someday I'm going to be a movie star, he said. And he goes, and that's the truth. He said, and Arnold knew he was going to be a movie star someday, and perhaps the governor of California. So that's inspiration for young folks.
That's quite a story. Now, does Arnold himself, who was born in Austria, of course, who was Mr. Universe, I can't remember what years, does he have any sort of musical inclination? Does he know how to play any instruments or sing at least?
I don't know. Not according to what I know about him. I don't believe he's a musician, but you never know. He might pick up a guitar.
So, Bill, what instrument do you refuse to even touch?
Well, I stick with the woodwind and brass. So if somebody comes in with some drums or a violin or a guitar, I have resources where I can, or friends and colleagues, of course, that I can refer them to my colleagues. Now, if a substandard instrument comes in and I know I can't make it better, I hate to say I'll refuse it. I just explain to them why it would not be worth their time and money to have me work on it, because it wouldn't be any better and nobody would benefit. So I'll send something like that off and not work on it.
Have you ever dropped an instrument and went, oh my goodness, another part I have to repair? Or how careful are you with these instruments?
Well, I have my bench and I have my rug on the bench, and I'm set in my ways. I have my chair up against the bench and I work on it. So there's very little chance that it's going to roll off the bench. It's on a rug. Now, saxophones, I actually put on a wooden mandrel that's cloth covered, and so that's in the air. I can't ever really remember dropping any instruments. I've seen my customers drop an instrument. You fix an instrument, then you drop it, then you got to fix it all over again.
You can play as well?
That's right. Now, you have to know, I'm not a professional musician. I went from high school right into repair school at the University of New York. When when I entered the program, I actually was a percussionist, so I really had to talk my way into the program. And of course, I took methods classes in woodwinds and brass and learned how to play the instruments. And since then, I've played as many instruments as I've took in, but nothing professionally. And how wonderful it is to fix them and then go see them being played, whether it be a huge arena or even a school auditorium. It makes no difference. It's very rewarding.
Can you tell me how your book with the band Memoirs of a Music Shop came to be? You mentioned here about R.D. Gilbert and Ray Ojeda and William Brannon. Can you give us a little bit of story of who they are and what they do?
Now that's our prelude to the book. That wasn't written by me. That was written by Gerhard Koch, who is the principal clarinetist in the New York City Ballet Orchestra. Gerhard, which I refer to him as Gary, was one of my first customers, and he was one of my first top-end customers. So we became friends over the years, and I've learned an awful lot from Gary. Now, Gary was saying what you had just mentioned, that when he would go into town, again, in the Yellow Pages, he would look through the Yellow Pages and see what shops were around. And because New York City Ballet's summer home is in Saratoga, he wanted to know what shop was around. And lo and behold, he looked me up at the Yellow Pages and saw Cole's Woodwind shop. And he so eloquently wrote that, what we call a prelude or a foreword, and so nicely. And he's so kind, and it's one of my favorite parts of the book, reading what he wrote.
Yeah, I literally like the whole concept. For instance, you talk about like chapter 6, 907 19th Street, where you talk about the space at Hilton Music Location. Now, Bill, Cole's Woodwind and Brass, a small building, 16 by 20. That's pretty small. How did you manage?
It was easy. It was only myself and maybe an apprentice. I only had maybe two apprentices at the same time. But no, my idea was to start small and grow. And that's exactly what I did. I got bigger and bigger. And probably the biggest shop I had was probably about 1,500 square feet. And I hated it. I had more employees, and although I loved my employees, I loved all my apprentices, I was starting to become too much of a businessman. In other words, dealing with the business part of it, and I was less time on the bench. And one day my wife said, it's okay. You can go back to being a small repair shop again. And that's what I did. And that's when I moved to Saratoga Springs. I took one apprentice with me at the time, and opened up again back in, I think it was a 350 square foot shop. And you don't need a big shop. You really don't. If you go into New York City and you go to some of the most famous shops in the world, they're very small shops with a seasoned technician and an apprentice or two. And it's really all you need.
Can you give us some of the musicians that actually literally walked in and handed you their instrument and said, "Here, can you fix this?" And you went, "Oh my goodness." Do you have that "oh my goodness" moment?
I sure do. I think the very first time I worked on a famous musician's instrument was probably Ian Anderson's flute from Jethro Tull. He actually didn't come into the shop. It was like 2:00 on a Saturday. I'm just before 2:00, and I always closed at 2:00 on a Saturday. And somebody called me up and said, we have a flute that needs to be fixed. Can you help me out? And I said, well, I'm only here for another 15 minutes. If you can come over right now, I'll do it for you. I said, but I really need to go. And he goes, okay. I'm the road manager for Jethro Tull. I'm going to be bringing Ian Anderson's flutes over. I says, oh, wait. and I had tickets to the show. My brother-in-law had actually bought me tickets for my birthday, and we were going to the show anyhow. So you can imagine how excited I was that he was bringing a flute over. In fact, he brought over 2 flutes because Ian usually travels with a trunk full of flutes. And 2 of his favorite flutes weren't working. He had just gotten off of the European tour, and it was a very humid summer, and everything was sticking on it. So I fixed the instruments, and then that night I delivered them to him before the show and got to meet Ian for the first time. And I would meet him a few times after that and work on his instruments once again. So I was on a high that day, and it was wonderful to meet him.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was really impressed with the amount of people, and also professional players. Father Flanagan, Frank Lalo. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And I try to stress that it's not all about the backstage experiences, although they're actually wonderful. It's all the wonderful experience I've had as a music shop owner, all the serendipitous moments. A very early time in my shop, within the first year, when I didn't even have a shop yet. I was fixing instruments out of my parents' garage. 2 young kids knocked on the door, and I think this boy must have been in 4th grade. He was holding his baritone horn, and then he had his little sister there, and he said, are you the man that fixes the instruments? And I says, I am. Well, how can I help you? He goes, can you take this dent out of my baritone horn? And I'm looking at this horn, and it is just riddled with dents. Why that one dent? I said to the young man. And he said, because that's the dent that's holding my gerbil in there. I said, how do you know your gerbil is in it? He said, because my sister saw him walk in, and he never came out. And feel it. That's that spot right there. It's warm. And sure enough, it was. And so those are I got him out, and by the way, alive and all shivering and wet. We, wrapped them up in a paper towel, and they went off. But those are the moments that really shaped me and made me who I am, just fixing people's instruments and getting the joy out of it, and the pure joy of helping somebody continue to play their music it's words can't describe it.
I can imagine the feeling you get when you have one of those instruments in your hands and you're like, okay, let me check. What do we do? And when you either take it apart, I don't know if there's more joy in putting it back together. There's more joy in having it back in the hands of the musician who originally brought it in and say, can you fix this? Have you ever had anyone say, oh, wow, this sounds even better?
I have to say I love to hear that, and it does happen more times than you might think, because you have to think of an instrument, how it slowly goes out. So a musician starts this, okay, they change the reeds and they adjust this or that, and they put up with these little leaks, and the little leaks get a little bigger and bigger, and before you know it, the instrument, it's got to be the instrument, and you'll bring it to me, or she'll bring it to me, and I'll fix it. And because it went out so slowly, they don't realize. So when I go through it and bring it back to its original beauty, if you will, then they'll say, oh my God, I didn't realize it was so bad. Thank you. So, and that never gets old. I never get sick of hearing thank you, and the instrument plays wonderful.
That's great news to hear that. I can imagine how the musicians feels when they're like playing their woodwind instrument and they're thinking, wow, that bill is good. Have you ever had the word of mouth people that come in and say, hey, I heard that you repair instruments?
It's a type of business that it is all word of mouth, really. When I was younger, I used to take my business card and go up to a musician. It could be a local musician or somebody just coming through town, and give them my card. And most of the times they gave the card back and said, yeah, no thanks. But if you walked up to that person and said, hey, I just had my saxophone fixed, check out this guy, they would go, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'll have to check him out. So I've always relied on word of mouth, and I've never taken that lightly. If somebody ever recommended my services, I always felt like I needed to do a good job for the musician and for the person who recommended, because I wouldn't want to let either one of them down, really.
100%. It's to say, okay, this is a clarinet, this is a French horn. I'm going to take care of it. Doesn't matter whether Pete Smith plays in the band downtown and nobody knows him but the area, or this clarinet belongs to whoever who's well known around the world. You treat them all the same. That's the thing.
Boy, you get it. And that's a great point, Chris. Ricardo Morales is the principal clarinetist in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he'll come in my shop and just hang out and practice for that night's performance while I work on his other instrument. And it's so important that that instrument is right. So when he goes on stage and plays, it brings out the best in him, and he's relying on his equipment. It's important. Now, a fourth grader comes in. It's his first Christmas concert ever. I mean, his grandparents are going to be his brothers and sisters, his moms and dad, and his instrument breaks. And I fix it for that young boy or girl. It's just as important to that musician. So that's where it becomes equal. Of course, Ricardo Morales is a bigger player than this fourth grader, but in that musician's heart, I need my instrument playing. And so that's where it all evens out. And again, it's very, very rewarding as a technician.
Yeah, I can understand that. It's you want to put a smile on everyone's face, regardless of whether how old they are or whether they're known or what not known. Instruments are instruments. You know, it doesn't matter. And
music is music. I mean, think about how powerful music is, and in the world today, and it's the same no matter what language. Music is music, and we need it for our social voice, if you will. It's so important to the human race, I believe.
How you are so passionate about what you do, and is there going to be a time when you're just going to hand over the shop to someone and train them and say, okay, I can't do this anymore?
I don't know. I'm turning 65 next month. I have no desire.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
And Merry Christmas.
Yes, 5 days before Christmas. It's a great time to have a birthday. You know, the tree is up. I'm getting all kinds of presents from both sides. It's great. To continue repairing, I don't have any desire to stop right now. But what I do like to do is teach. I've been doing a lot of teaching like through school districts, teaching music teachers how to do small repairs so they can help their students, especially like a time of need before a concert or an important performance. And I've also traveled to Haiti, and I've taught Haitians how to repair instruments.
Wow, and Haiti.
Yes, yep. And I've made some wonderful friends, some great people down there. And although I haven't been able to go in a few years, I'm still teaching over the internet. And we were talking about my camera earlier before we started the interview, and I use that to teach people remotely.
That's amazing. Wow. I guess if I owned a small music repair shop, well, you got a good niche there. So what are you going to do? Yeah, what are you going to do if something goes wrong and you can't use your hands anymore, like arthritis or illness? How do you deal with that, especially COVID? How did that help you? Like, did you have to close your shop?
I closed my shop for 3 months during the worst time of COVID, and I set up a shop at my home. And what people would do if they really needed their instruments or really wanted their instruments fixed, they would send them to me to my home, and I would pick them up at the post office, repair them, I would let them sit for, I think it was like 5 days. They said the germs would die off. So I would let them sit for 5 days, fix the instrument, clean them all out with alcohol, and send them back. And so I had some business that way. So I actually survived COVID financially and health-wise just fine, along with my family, thank God.
Yeah. It's the most terrible time because many businesses went under. They couldn't even recover. It's terrible, but now everyone's awake, I guess, and going back to the regular, well, I can't say normal way of life, but going back to what they enjoy, especially you. And a little more normal. It must be pretty good to know that you can now go back into your shop and start repairing again.
I think this last year was probably my busiest summer of my 45-year career because now everybody is playing. Now, musicians, they don't stop playing just because of the pandemic. They keep playing. Now they're playing on rooftops and balconies and over Zoom. Musicians don't stop playing. So after 2 and even 3 years of not having their instruments serviced, we got this flood of instruments in. So my son and I have been working nonstop for the last year, just trying to keep up with the backlog.
Well, how much backlog do you think you have?
Well, I typically have probably like 25 instruments in the shop at any given time. There were times during last summer I probably had close to 300. So, our workload really increased.
How long do you think a repair for a saxophone would be?
How long?
Yeah.
Well, if it was a total rebuild, like I took the entire instrument apart, replaced all the pads, corks, and felts, tightened the keys, and reset the keys, it takes me about a day and a half to 2 days. Now, an adjustment could take as little as 10 minutes. If the octave key was bent on the neck, I could just straighten it out real quick and test it, and off it went. So it all depends on how much needs to be done to the instrument.
So basically, you would have 300 instruments, like 20 saxophones and 20 French horns and all the other stuff, and then you eventually okay, there's 300 instruments here. We can clean, we can fix, we can repair these in under a couple days. Is that a possibility, or is that really not reality?
That's not reality, really. And when I say 300 instruments, I'm saying 300 instruments. A lot of those instruments could be schools. So if I receive them in June and they need them in September, well, then I pace myself. I'll repair so many school instruments during the week. And of course, the professional musicians are going to get priority because they're making their living. So I'll give them priority. And in between, I do the school instruments. And by the end of the summer, with both my son and I working on them, we target September, early October to deliver those instruments to whatever school they belong to.
That's amazing. I was thinking, then why doesn't the musician have a backup? This saxophone or whatever woodwind you're going to be repairing for this musician, you're going to have it for at least a week, maybe less. But don't they usually have a backup? Because they know that one's going to go down.
Yeah, no, some musicians do have a backup, but you'd be surprised how many don't. It's almost like a love affair with their instrument, really. If, say, somebody's playing a Paris Selmer saxophone and they've been searching for this instrument for years and they finally found it, they're not going to sway from that saxophone. Yeah, they're just gonna. It's always going to be their favorite saxophone. So they're just going to not buy anything else, and that's going to be their instrument. It could be the same thing with a flute or a clarinet. And even if they have a backup instrument, if they have a special concert or a performance to play, they're going to want to play that favorite instrument.
So flutes must be pretty easy to repair, I guess, because you're just cleaning inside.
I really like that thought a lot, but it's not.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
still trying to perfect my flute repairing. Flutes are probably one of the harder instruments to fix. Because
Really?
there's, well, with the saxophone, you can take a pad and you glue it and you heat up the back of the key cup and you can fold it around. But with a flute, the pad is held in with a washer and screw. So if there's even minute leak in that pad, you have to take the whole instrument apart, reseat the pad, put it back together again. Okay, it's still not. Okay, take it all apart, put it back together again, and you have to do that with with 16 pads or whatever many pads are on the flute, depending on what model it is, and humidity affects the pads, so you can have an instrument playing perfectly, and then the next day you come in and I always say that the gremlins got their hands on it, and it's leaking again because of course things change overnight, and then you have to go back and reseat the pads, again until that felt kind of settles down, and so it is quite a process with flutes, and they can be the most challenging sometimes.
How do you know that the flute is fixed and sounding good and ready when you're talking about all these different components for each?
Well, when I test an instrument, I usually play a chromatic scale. So I listen to each note as I go from note to note. Do the notes have the same timbre? Are they speaking as well? You get to one note and it kind of fizzles out, or it sounds airy. Then I'll go back and look at that mechanism to investigate why it's not doing it. So that's how you know if a flute is very resonant and it plays easily, and the high notes are coming out sweet, and the low notes on the foot joint are coming out nice and easy. Well, with great volume, then the flute's pretty tight. And of course, I always leave the final test up to the musician because it's their instrument, and they ultimately have to love it or say, something's wrong with it. So.
Well, we love it, Bill. Everyone out there, please hit the subscribe button for more content, and everything will be linked down below, especially a link to get Bill's book with the band Memoirs of a Music Shop Owner. Excellent stuff here. I'm looking at this one here, Father Flanagan. Can you give me an idea of what that one's about?
Father Flanagan, it sounds like a character out of a movie, but he was very, very real. He was an older Catholic priest who started a band in the very in the downtown Troy, which was a very poor section of Troy, and the children couldn't afford instruments, so he would accumulate instruments, and he started this band. This man never played an instrument in his life, and he started a band. And these kids were fabulous. They all played by ear, and they played these instruments that they really should have been discarded because they were in such rough shape. And he would come over with the instruments, and I would go, "Oh my God, how am I going to get these things playing?" So I would fix them up, and I probably would do $50 worth of work or $100 worth of work, and you say, "How much, Mr. Cole?" Because he had this Irish brogue, of course. Just myself, I can't imitate him very well, but he had an Irish brogue. He would ask, "Bill, how much?" And I'd say $25 or $10 or I would never charge him because that was my way of giving back when I didn't have a lot of money to give, so I gave it myself, and he go, okay, he never said anything. He just would pay me or send me a check, and sometimes the check didn't come, but it didn't matter. I was helping him out, and it was a wonderful experience knowing him. And one day before he retired, I said, "Father, would you bless my shop?" And he just looked at me, kind of gave me a smirk, and he goes, "Billy, it's already blessed." And he just walked out. So I was thinking, did he bless it when I wasn't looking, or did he just notice that this shop would, no matter what, it was an extreme, supreme compliment, and really hit home.
Yeah, and wow, Bobby Strickland and Garth Hudson. Give us an idea of what's the story behind Garth Hudson that you had to write chapter 14 about him.
Well, Garth, I met Garth through one of my customers, again, a referral. It was a saxophone player. Paul Brannon was his name. He was from Woodstock, and we all know Woodstock is, home to a lot of great musicians. And Paul came in with Jimmy Whiter, who was the guitarist with the band at the time, post Last Waltz. And Jimmy was saying, just looking around my shop, saying, Garth should know about this shop. So he called Levon Helm and got Garth's number because he didn't know Garth's number. And
wow.
Called up Garth and said, man, I'm in this shop. You should check it out, because Garth is a saxophonist too. And he goes, Garth wants to talk to you. And I went, really? Okay. So I get on the phone and Garth says, hello. He goes, I understand you fix saxophones. I have some saxophones that need fixing. And that's how it all started. Garth wouldn't come up to the shop only because, he mostly was, recording during the day and into the night, and he was never really got up to the shop very often. So I would go down to his house, or many times the studio where he was working, and bring him instruments and, pick up instruments or whatever. But that's how I met Garth, and we became very good friends, and got some of my favorite stories are in that chapter of Garth Hudson. And they're very, very blessed to know someone of his musical knowledge, and he's a legend. And as it turns out, a great guy too.
That's awesome. Can you bring him our way, please?
I would love to.
Thanks. I really love, wow. This is an incredible book. Like, so many chapters here. The one story I like is when I saw chapter 41, Chicago returns to Saratoga. Oh, Chicago, the band. And I realized, no, he's not talking about the band. And B.B. King. Give us a story about B.B. King. I am like, wow, please tell me you met B.B. King.
I did not meet B.B. King, but we kind of went on a whim to one of his concerts at Saratoga Performing Arts Center, which is a venue that my wife and I would frequently go to. And I just thought, B.B. King, he was older and getting on in age. And I said, we really have to go see him. This is what a great opportunity. So we bought the tickets at the last moment, and I expected to be way up into the rafters, but they opened the orchestra pit at the last minute, and we got second row seats.
Nice.
The day of the show. So how I tell the story is, he just sat in this metal chair and just wailed on his guitar, and I just, with my mouth open, just watched this concert. He was absolutely fabulous. And at this one point, he had these guitar pins, and he flipped them into the audience. And, people would lose their minds and dive after him and everything. He's just flipping them all over the place. And he noticed that my wife was just sitting there smiling, and she wasn't, she wasn't diving for the pins like everybody else. She was just, just taking it all in. And their eyes met, and he picked up a pin and he handed it to her, like over the first row, and motioned to the people to give this pin to that lady right there. And that's as close as we got to meeting B.B. King. And what a wonderful story, right?
Yeah, that's a great story. Wow. If I was in your position, I'd be like wanting to meet all these people. I'd say, imagine one day I'll be like, hey, yes, I know Sting personally. Let me email him and let him know that you're interested in interviewing him. We'd like to get Sting on our podcast and a bunch of others, but they're pretty inaccessible. But I'm looking ahead. I'm seeing myself, 3-4 years from now, and I'm like, oh, yeah, Sting and I are good friends.
You never know, because they're just folks like us.
Exactly. So this is wonderful. I really love those stories. Bill, give us an idea, like for instance, maybe a flute or a saxophone. No, actually more like a flute that was actually bent. How do you repair those?
Um, I have mandrels to fix them, but you see me smiling because I know that you know it's pretty much a given. I'm going to fix at least two flutes a year that have been completely bent in half. Not bent, but like just bowed, because little kids tend to put them on their bed, and their brothers and sisters tend to jump on the bed, and you can guess what happens, And um, so you just bend them back on mandrels very carefully, so they don't bend the other way and dent, so you have to just do it very carefully.
Yeah, but even won't there be like some sort of crack in there, and the person that you have to give the flute back would say, "Hey, thanks for unbending it, but got a little crack here." How do you repair those cracks? Is there like a resin or something to?
No, if an instrument ever cracks, like where there's a hole there, you can form a patch inside of the patch on it, and that mostly happens with trumpets, like in the knuckles of the slides, when they get dented too many times, they'll crack, and then you just form a patch and put them over it. And if that musician loves that instrument enough and they want to keep it going, you do anything you need to do to patch it up, and quite literally, and send them on their way.
That's amazing. What do you think is the most uh, largest instrument that you have repaired that needed two people to lift it while you're working on it?
I've never needed two people to lift it, but probably the biggest instrument I've ever fixed was a bass saxophone. I probably fixed like maybe less than a dozen of them over my 45-year career. One of the bass saxophones I repaired was for Garth Hudson, and he was playing it on one of his later albums, and so that was fun.
And then it brought to my mind solder, and then it thought to my mind welding, and I thought of this musician I saw. He looked like a blues band or bluegrass, whatever, and he had created this instrument. I'm like, you can create an instrument and everything. The most rarest instrument I've ever seen was the didgeridoo. I think was the Australian didgeridoo that has this kind of
Sure.
didgeridoo, yeah. But the most weirdest instrument I saw was someone who took a bed frame and turned it into a flute and blew on one side of the bed frame, and it came out the other bed frame, and there's a lot of welding and solder, and he produced this instrument, and he played in the band. I don't know what he named it, but it was sort of like a flute.
The bedaphone.
The bed, yeah. The bed frame phone, yeah, that's interesting. Have you ever had anything like that, or anything like, what is this? Oh, I made it myself. How do you repair this? You ever had that?
I don't think I've ever worked on any homemade instruments. I've seen them on the internet, like the guy who drilled out a carrot and made a flute out of a carrot.
I saw that too, yeah.
Yeah,
it worked really well. Yeah.
I mean, that's how instruments came to be. Somebody figured out if you knock some holes in whatever, you can blow into it and produce a sound. The first horns, the oxen horns or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. You got I love the chapters, like 52 chapters, and Return to Haiti, of course. I see Frank Serpico's name there, so give us a story about that one.
Back in the 80s, Frank Serpico, which for the folks, or to remind them or let them know, was a famous New York City policeman who fought corruption, and he wound up getting shot, and there's a whole story to it. But so he's a rather famous New York City policeman, and so I saw the movie Serpico when we were kids.
That was with Al Pacino, right?
With Al Pacino, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so it is based on him, okay.
Yeah, so fast forward to the 80s, Frank was dating my wife's girlfriend, a good friend of ours, and we met Frank. Come to find out, he was interested in playing the flute at the time, and so he came into the shop and he wound up buying a flute from me, and eventually a saxophone, and we became friends. And so, as the story goes, he went to didgeridoo, and then he didn't need me anymore. So, and hand drums. So he was experimenting heavily in music, and it was a long time, probably 20 years passed, and he looked me up again, and we kind of reunited, if you will, and he bought another clarinet for me, and I tell that story in the book. But very interesting person, one of the most interesting customers I've ever had.
Yeah, I've heard all about Frank Serpico, and I love the movie. And I don't know how much the movie was based on reality. I don't know if they based it on his biography or whatever. That's good. So you were mentioning earlier about people wanting to get you to repair a violin or stringed instrument, that you can recommend somebody. Is there an equivalent of someone like you who actually repairs stringed instruments that you know, or you have to say, well, this person repairs violins, this person over here repairs bass guitars, or it's like, oh, you want your guitar and your violin fixed, go to this person.
Exactly. I mean, I just try to think of a good match for that particular customer, whether they're professional or student, and recommend them to a colleague. And there's plenty of people out there that would be happy to help them out, and they do the same for me. If a saxophone walks into their violin shop, they might say, "I'm not your man. Go call Bill Cole and see if he can help you out." And so it's mutual respect, for sure.
Do you ever hear the background stories of people who bring in their instruments, and then you hear the fact that, whatever his name is, works for the mafia, so he's making sure that you don't mess up his instrument? You ever had that as well? Hearing the stories of them? Or you're like, well, just let me fix the instrument. I don't care if they're mafia. I don't care if they're this or that. You ever hear stories like that?
No. No, I can't really think. That's really interesting. There's always a backstory, though, to your point. For instance, Guard's bass saxophone, he bought that in New York City. I don't know, probably bought it maybe in the 70s. And that bass saxophone used to belong to a guy named Adrian Rollini, who was a famous sax player and a vibraphonist back in the swing era. And so imagine that the history of that one saxophone. It's like every instrument has a backstory to it, whether it's you played it or I played it, I fixed it, or somebody used to own it and they gave it to their mother, whatever. Every instrument has a story. And when I sell an instrument, quite often somebody will say, "What's the story behind this? Who owned it? Why did they get rid of it?" And so that's the fun part of being a broker of instruments.
Which brings us to another story about the red violin. Now, isn't the movie The Red Violin, isn't that based on that it ended up with as a red violin that through time was put in someone else's hand? Is that what the chapter's about?
They call it the Mendelssohn violin because the Mendelssohn family owned that violin at one time, and then it kind of fell off the face of the earth. It went missing. Whoever owned it just the people lost track of it, and it was purchased by an older gentleman for his granddaughter. And anyhow, she owns it now, and you can hear her play it. Just really quite near me in Lake Luzerne, because she runs the Lake Luzerne Music School in the summertime, and she'll often play it up there.
Somebody comes in and say, "Hey, I got a trumpet here. It used to belong to Louis Armstrong." Like, wouldn't you be investigating that, or would you just, okay, sure? Because it would be like What are you doing with it? Are you related? Why are you giving it to me? Stuff like that. It should be in the Louis Armstrong Museum and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what you need to have it documented. From time to time, somebody will come in and say this, this famous musician owned this or whatever. But unless it's documented somehow by the estate or the person, it's really hard to tell if it really was played by that person. And it could be something similar. I often think about Charlie Parker, and he played so many saxophones, because he would play a saxophone and I hear that he would pawn it and then get another saxophone, or somebody else would give him a saxophone, or he'd buy another saxophone. So he went through a lot of saxophones. Who knows where they are now? Who knows if somebody's playing it, they don't know Charlie Parker played it. So these are the things I think about. I can't help myself.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I want my saxophone fixed, or I want my flute fixed. You ever had those nasty phone calls with people saying, "What's taking you so long?" Or do everyone realize, okay, this flute, I had sent it in to Bill before, and it took him 2-3 days to fix. So, if I don't get it within like 4 or 5 days, I'm okay with it. You ever had any of those irate customers?
Of course, a businessman that would come into my shop early on in my career, he looked at me and he says, "Bill, if you can please 80% of your customers, consider it 100%, because you're never going to please everybody." And I could up that. I could say that I've pleased 95% of my customers. 5%, you can't please them no matter what you do. Whatever the reason is, maybe they're just unhappy people. Who knows? Maybe they need to give somebody a hard time. Who really knows the real reason? But I'm pretty confident that I've been able to help a lot of people, and most people have been satisfied. But you have that occasional person where it used to bother me. It used to really bother me. But now that I'm older, I realize that that older man was right. Now I'm that older man saying, just don't worry about it. Just do your best. And if you can't please everybody, whatever.
Let's go back to when you said you went to Haiti because you wanted to teach them how to repair small instruments. Many of them are probably saying, "Oh, he's repairing a flute or repairing a saxophone."
That is a great point, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because when I first went to Haiti, I tagged along with a mission team from a local church. They would send down instruments, and sometimes I would check them over before they sent them down or brought them down, and I did that for like 30 years. And then one day they asked me if I would mind going with them and fixing the instrument, because all the instruments that they had sent down over the years were now they were broken in disrepair. And of course, I was very happy to go, and I went. And my intentions were to go once. I'll go down. I'll fix as many instruments as I can in a week. And while I'm down there, I'll teach the music teacher how to do small repairs. Maybe it'll help him keep the instruments going. So when I got there, of course, the teacher was there. And this is at the Holy Spirit School and Church in Las Cajolas. It's way up in the mountains, like 30 miles away, but it takes 2.5 hours to get there because of the roads. And so sure enough, I arrived, the music teacher's there, the translator, and 6 young men that were from the school. They were seniors, and one was another teacher. And so I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'll teach everybody." Chris, they were so attentive. They were so bright. They were picking up repair techniques faster than I've ever taught before. And by the end of the session, I said to myself, I'm not wondering if I'm ever going to come back. I'm wondering when I'm going to come back, because these guys are just fabulous. And I did. I went back four times, so a total of 5 times I went down there and held workshops. Today, 2 of those original 6 have their own shop, and they call it Billy's Shop of Haiti. That's translated. At first I thought they named it after me, but no, they named it after my son. Because in Haiti, if you're a farmer or you're a mechanic or whatever you are, the tradition is you teach your son or your daughter. And so moved were they when I brought my son down there one time that he worked alongside of me. They wanted that too. So in his honor, they named their business after my son, Billy, who is also Billy.
Wow, many stories that you have as just repairing instruments, and you have this whole book that you wrote, and all the people you met, like Garth Hudson, and it's amazing. And wow,
And they're all
all their
stories. That's
playing.
all they are, really. Just short stories. And I always said that you could find the extraordinary in the ordinary. And mentioning those backstage experiences, how great they were. To be able to connect with somebody in Haiti on a personal level and a professional level and make a difference. Just things like that are the wonderful experiences that I knew I had to write down and share with people.
Once again, with the band Memoirs of a Music Shop Owner by Bill Cole. Excellent book. I'm so glad I was able to read it. You got a lot of stories in it, and it's really good that you remember these stories and you come out with a book. Are you thinking of coming out with a part 2 as well?
Well, towards the end of the book, I shared my experiences in Haiti, and I found that I was writing like 3 or 4 or 5 chapters just on Haiti alone. So I backed off on that, and I decided that's the way I'll end the book is about my work in Haiti. And I have so much more to talk about Haiti that's probably could be my next book. And how I continued that even through a pandemic and even through all the civil unrest in Haiti, I'm still able to send instruments down. In fact, I was reading your email just before this interview, and I got an email from Father Jean Darraville from Las Cajobos, and they just received my tuba that I sent down, I think in September. It took that long for them to get it because it's so hard to get instruments across the country. And I was so glad. I was just made my night because I've been praying that tuba would make it into their hands. And it's laid in Port-au-Prince for probably 2.5 months. And finally, somebody was able to retrieve it from DHL facility in Port-au-Prince. And now they have a tuba.
Bill, how do you package a tuba or a saxophone or a flute to send it somewhere, like especially Haiti and other places? How do you package them? Because you know that the mail system, DHL, Purelator, or whatever delivery company you use, because I actually work. Well, I'm a customer service now, but I actually worked with a company that they always gave us boxes that were like wrecked and broken. And well, how do you know that the father isn't saying we just received our instrument and it's dented, it's bad? How come, Bill, that you sent us such a poorly looking instrument? And then you have to explain to them, no, when I put in a box and fixed it up and sent it out, it was brand new, so it's their fault. Like, how do you do that? How do you package it so they get it the way you sent it?
Amazingly, it usually doesn't get damaged, but if something does get damaged and it's pretty evident that the box is beat up and maybe the bell is dented, the tuba that I sent them this time was a brand new tuba, so it was absolutely perfect when I sent it. And hopefully, the bell lip isn't, pushed down a little because whoever dropped the box was not paying attention. So I trust that the tuba is fine. But you're right. Sometimes it's inevitable. The instrument's going to get damaged. And what I do to try to offset that is to pack it well within its case so it doesn't bounce it around, because if the instrument is jolted even an inch or two hard enough, something's going to bend on it. So you make sure that instrument is packed well within its case, and then just lots of packing around it in an oversized box, and you're usually pretty safe. But things do happen, and it has to be repaired when it gets there. But again, not too often, thankfully.
Did you have anything else in mind that you wanted to do with your life?
I had no idea I was going to be going to school for music until a month before I graduated from high school. My music teacher was the one who encouraged me, and my then 15-year-old girlfriend as well encouraged me to go to college to learn how to fix instruments. And today we have 5 grandchildren. She's been a continuous support the entire time. But having said that, yeah, it's been a great life. You know what? After 45 years, I still can't wait to get to that shop in the morning. How blessed is that? Everybody should have a job like that. I can't wait to get to the shop because I'm thinking about what I'm going to do that day and who I'm going to meet and the rewards from it. So I'm a very lucky guy.
You are blessed. And as a believer in and faith in Jesus, I know that the Old Testament, the Bible mentions about praising the Lord with the lute, praise the Lord with the flute, praise the Lord with the harp. When I get to heaven and I'm playing the trumpet or the saxophone, it gets broken, I'm going to say, is Bill here? Has he arrived yet? And I want to take it to you. Here, you fix it.
Can you imagine the band that's up there?
I know.
Can you imagine the work?
Yeah, I can imagine.
All those instruments.
In the streets of gold with a band when I parade every day, it'd be awesome.
Who was the archangel who played the trumpet? Was it Michael? Michael, come blow your horn?
No, it was Gabriel.
Gabriel, okay.
Yeah.
So imagine me coming through the gates, if they'll have me. Gabriel comes up to me and says, "Hey man, my third valve is sticking. Can you help me out?"
We really appreciate you, Bill, joining us and recording an episode with us. And I think it's wonderful what you do and helping musicians out. And I hope you can keep doing it, and maybe getting your son or whoever to even do better than you. And I would recommend everyone to get it because there's lots and lots of interesting information and the people you met. Wow, you got a lot of history, a lot of backstory here. This is amazing.
Yep, it's been a great life, and I enjoy telling the stories. And thank you for what you do too, Chris. What a wonderful thing you do, and I've seen some of the things you've done, and it's all.
I really appreciate that, Bill. Thank you very much. Yeah, and your stories and they're so mesmerizing, Bill. A lot of them, even going to Haiti. That's quite a place, especially. I'm so glad that you enjoy going back and forth.
First trip and how inspired I was, and on the flight back to New York, I thought of all the things I could do, how I could continue my work in Haiti, and that's when I came up with the name Horns for Haiti. Eventually, it became a non-for-profit, and we have a board of directors now, and lots of support. A lot of people who help give us instruments, money to ship instruments, and it's pretty great thing for sure.
And please, everyone, please hit the subscribe button for more content. Of course, that the book with the band Memoirs, a music shop owner by Bill Cole, is on sale at Amazon, and even the Kindle version is on sale as well. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Bye.
Bye.